You get into your second childhood, girl, like me.
Didn't jump down.
He's 63.
You're just a punk girl.
I love it when you say that. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah,
Cleaning up the mess.
blood and guts. Hell, nobody
Roadkill. You gotta clean up your
Almost sent out an email to everybody saying we should all wear red tonight, but I thought, oh God, that'll just irritate everybody.
It would
He
probably.
took him.
Maybe for the Super Bowl.
And you know how cold it's going to be out there Sunday. At 8 above, it's going to be a high.
Turned on the siren.
It's gonna be miserable out there.
Cat did.
feral cat.
They play our opponents.
didn't look like
better in the winter.
A feral cat. You
They
know,
play all the time.
he just walked right up to that.
Yeah, but they're in our house to
Hey,
this
hey,
I'm
even
sorry.
if it
I
was,
just
it's
want
just
the roads to be cleared up because I watch the game at home, which is fine. But I want to go to Cali to watch a game. I want to go where all my friends I've known for 100 years are. But I won't get in a car and drive. Just
No, I don't blame you.
I'm
The
not-
ambiance is nice, but not especially those other.
Okay, let's call this meeting in order. Notice of an open work session of the City Council of the City of North Kansas City, Missouri, January 15th, 2019. Mr. Eric.
Oh, thank you, sir. Tonight's work session is on proposed changes to the city's liquor code. I'd like to go over proposed changes, and then based upon council's direction tonight, we would bring you ordinance changes at a later meeting. So with that, I'll turn it over to the Police Chief, Steve Meeman.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, myself, John Harbrucker, who's the Director of Liquor Controller, before you tonight to discuss 5 potential changes to the liquor code that we have identified a couple of issues that need attention based upon the number of licenses. We've got a couple of suggestions on some things to consider regarding how we administer the code. And so with that being said, we're going to start moving through this. The first item we want to address is the number of licenses that are available for establishments. And broadly speaking, we've got 2 classifications of liquor by the drink codes here in the city. One, and we're going to use the term tavern. That is an establishment that sells liquor by the drink, but does not have at least 50% of their revenue from food. And then the second classification is restaurant bar, which is liquor by the drink with 50% or more revenue from food. If you remember back in February of 2017, we came before you, at that time it was Matt Brantner and myself, came before you to discuss increasing the number of licenses in certain categories, and some adjustments were made at that time. However, one adjustment that did not get made was the number of tavern licenses available. At that time, we had the limit was 12. We recommended taking it to 16. When all the changes were made in the code, we failed to catch that one, and so the number remains at 12. At this time, there are 12 licensed taverns in the city. We know of at least 2 separate businesses that are in communication with the city that may be taking an additional 2. So one of the recommendations that we want to make to you tonight is to go from 12 authorized licenses for taverns to 18. Believing that 2 of those may well be spoken for, that leaves 4 additional licenses that would be available as the city continues to evolve. And if we reach the point that all 18 of those are spoken for, then the council can reevaluate the situation at that point in time. But rather than trying to come back to you for 2 here and 2 there, we believe that the limit of going from 12 to 18 is appropriate, and that's the recommendation we're making. So that's issue number 1 that we're addressing. If there's any questions regarding that.
I think it might not be a bad idea to sort of go through these and get any council input one at a time. So at this time, could we get any council feedback on that recommendation?
Is that a 3 o'clock license, or is that a 1:30 license, or those are just taverns? Doesn't matter what time they close, they're just selling by the drink without the 50% of food?
Yes, that would be correct.
Okay.
They could be at 3 o'clock, they could be a restaurant bar.
1:30.
Right.
Okay, all right.
Have we looked into our crystal ball and figured out, will the additional 4 take care of what's going down in the 1 north that's coming up?
Based upon what my understanding is of what may well be going into One North, many of those are going to be restaurant bars, as opposed to pure tavern establishments. There's going to be food and drink in those locations. And in that situation, we have a sufficient number of food and drink licenses available. We're currently at 16, there's 6 available for a restaurant bar environment.
I would just point out that from my perspective, I like that we're gradually looking at increases without doing so dramatically. So I feel like the 18 is fine from my perspective. And if we, come to a point as we're sort of moving through the next several years that we sort of feel like we've tipped the scales and we have a little bit of an imbalance, then I think we can reevaluate and either hold or adjust back maybe to what we've had before. But I'm comfortable with the 18 recommendation.
I have no problem with it either. I think it's a very good plan.
I agree. I think it's an appropriate number.
I do too. I think 18's fine.
All right. Then moving on to the second issue. There are currently 8 licenses available for 3 a.m. closings. Only 6 of those are currently taken. Those 6 establishments are Helen's, Spirits Lounge, the AMF Pro Bowl, Chapels, River Aces, and Neon Wild. When we were before you in February of 17, there was some discussion about whether or not we should have more licenses than those 6 or not. And the question is how much is One North going to impact that? Quite frankly, based upon, once again, my understanding of the environment that we're probably going to be looking at down there, I don't know that any of those establishments are necessarily going to be interested in a 3 a.m. closing based upon their business model as I understand it anyway. So what I'd like to do is reduce the number of available 3 o'clock licenses from 8 down to 6. It will have no impact on the current environment.
Yes, I agree totally with that.
I agree with that too.
Yeah.
There's no need in this community.
I've never been in favor of 3 a.m. stuff anyway.
Neither am I.
Nothing good happens after 1:30.
Now, the last we looked at it, Spirits and AMF Bowl, I don't think they were using their 3 a.m. licenses. Is that still the case?
AMF Pro Bowl and Chapels do not use their 3 o'clock closing. They've got it, but they don't utilize it. Spirits, my understanding is they will from time to time, but not routinely. Helen's, Neon Wild, and River Aces do routinely close at the 3 a.m. limit. So I understand, it sounds like there's consensus from council then on reducing that number from 8 to 6.
Yes.
The next issue regards the licensing administration, and Mr. Harbrucker is going to address that issue.
Which one now? Here. Right. So, part of this, when the state of Missouri, when someone has to apply for their liquor license up there, they see every license as a brand new license. North Kansas City has it where you can transfer the license to somebody else. That also kind of goes in effect with the 3 a.m. license. So whatever they're currently licensed for, if it's a Sunday license, if it's a restaurant bar license, they get exactly what that is. State of Missouri doesn't really kind of see that. They see new group, new LLC, new company, corporation, you have to apply brand new. That was kind of another kind of discussion that the chief and I were having with the 3 a.m.'s license. Maybe there's somebody out there right now that is a good operator like the Chapels who does not utilize their 3 a.m., but then you get a new owner that does come in and they get exactly what is on that license, and then now they have a 3 a.m. and now they change their model into a dance club or something like that.
Well, now, actually, Chapels has been sold, so now that has been transferred to the new owners?
That's correct. They have been sold. Now, the same group is trying to keep that same model, but it's the next group that could be doing something along that same line.
No, I think that it shouldn't be transferable. I mean, when you buy a bar or something like that, that doesn't give you the guarantee that you're going to have all the licenses.
Well, and we're currently in conflict with state law on that. And so, as much as anything, I'd like to see us revoke or repeal this section 412.430 so that we have consistency in the licensing process between us and the state of Missouri.
I agree.
I agree with that. You got to stay in contact with the state law.
Now, according to the state of Missouri, does not allow transferring. Okay, so will we be in line with what the state had?
If we repeal 412.430, it brings us into alignment with the state licensing process.
Can I ask one question on that, though? So say we have, what is it, 6 3 a.m. liquor license, and one of those companies sells to another company. Someone could leap in and grab that 6th license. Since it's not being transferred, that would leave an open slot for...
That would be accurate. They could obtain that license. However, they will have to comply with the current laws, not the laws that were in effect with the old license holder.
Okay.
Which would require establishment of 25% of their sales from food and a 2 a.m. closing of the kitchen.
Okay.
Which is one of the changes that was made after the City Council Committee took a look at this approximately 3 years ago. Mr. Harbaugh.
One of the things Chief was just trying to ask, if the state, they do see cases as brand new, but they don't care how they apply on the city level. So as in Kansas City, you are able to do a change of ownership like you can in North Kansas City. But again, you're accepting exactly what is on that license.
Well, it seems we'd have a lot more control whether the state cares or not. And I think that's the point, is that we have control, particularly of those 3 o'clock licenses.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
So I understand there's consensus then to repeal section 412.430.
Yep.
Yes.
Yes.
All right. The next item to discuss involves the changing environment of North Kansas City, particularly in where residential properties may be developed, where there's discussions to develop residential properties, and the relationship between those properties and 3 a.m. licenses. I think I know that it's not a secret that there's been discussion about potential development in the area of 18th and Swift. And if that was to become reality, a lot of the people that might move there may be moving there because they enjoy the entertainment opportunities that exist in that area. However, if you're living there, you also have to sleep at some point in time. And 3 a.m. license holders, when people are coming out of an establishment at 2:30, 2:45 in the morning, they're going to be having fun, they've had a good time, they're going to be talking, they're going to be hollering. It's people leaving a bar. There's going to be horns honking, waving goodbye, which is going to be disruptive to the people that live close to those establishments. And it's not just the 18th and Swift development that is on my mind in this area. It's potential development in 1 North. I know that as part of the city's strategic plan, we're looking at developing residential properties in areas where they may not have ever existed before. And so the potential for conflict between late closing bars and residential units is going to be there as this city continues to grow and evolve. So what we're trying to do with this next proposal is to create at least some buffer zone between establishments that are licensed to close at 3 a.m. and residential units. One of the reasons that we went with 300 feet is, well, 2 reasons. Number one, we've got provisions already in the code that identify 300 feet to be the distance from daycares,
church and schools.
300 or 400?
It says 400.
This document says 400. I'm getting to that.
All right, then.
It's 300 feet for the distance from churches, schools, and daycare centers. We tried to take this to 400 feet just to create that additional separation. However, I'm asking you tonight to reduce that to 300 feet for residential properties as well. We do not want to impact the status quo of any 3 a.m. licensed establishment when we make this change. We don't want to impact anyone's business in the current environment. Today, we identified residential properties at the Oak Tree Apartments there at 20th and Swift that would be impacted by the 400-foot buffer. Not by a 300-foot, we're okay. But at 400 feet, chapels would be impacted by this 400-foot buffer. So if we take it to 300 feet, we're still creating a buffer. We're staying consistent within the church and school separation. And we're also hopefully going to create at least some type of a distance so that when residential properties do start to occur in or near licensed establishments, that the people that live there may be able to not be disturbed at 3 a.m. when an establishment closes. So that's what this is all about. I want to stress that, once again, we are not impacting any business currently. However, if new development does occur in the 18th and Swift area, when it's completed, it may require that 3 a.m. licenses are no longer issued to establishments that are within this 300-foot buffer. Mr. Barzee has done some preliminary research on this issue. I'll let him speak to what he's been able to determine on that point.
Wasn't planning on saying anything, but be glad to. I think to boil it down, it's pretty simple. The courts have found several cases that have held that under Missouri law, liquor licenses it's not a property interest that the person has in a liquor license. So sometimes cities have elected just not to renew a liquor license when it comes up. And they've been challenged, and they said they have the absolute right to do something like that. And so I think, like he said, preliminarily, I haven't checked all of what I would like to, but I see no legal reason that you can't proceed to do this if this is, if this is your desire to do so. You wouldn't get rid of a license in the middle of it, but remember, these have to be renewed annually, right? They're renewed annually, and if passed, I would suggest that that we start providing notices to everybody that gets a 3 a.m. license that, our law has changed, that if at any time you're within 300 feet of residential facilities, residences, your license is subject to not being renewed the next year. So everybody's put on notice up front. The chief and I have talked about that, and we think it's something that's would be fairly easy to do so that everybody has notice about that.
This is only for the 3 a.m. license?
Correct. We're only talking about the 3 a.m. license. That is correct.
I was thinking about Christine's down there. Isn't that the name of it?
Yeah, Firehouse.
Firehouse, They've got residents right next door and right behind them, I mean, it's
It would not apply. It would not apply there at all. No.
But now the other question is we hear a lot about getting grandfathered in. Now, I won't fly on that.
No, because you have to come and get a new license every single year. You have to get one. So you're guaranteed a license really for that year, but that doesn't mean you can't change the laws. Missouri, actually, as I found out, they're pretty good in allowing municipalities to have a say in restricting licenses. I mean, there's cases that are still in full force and effect. That Supreme Court case from 1946 that involves an ordinance in Springfield where they would not give them a license. Now, in that case, it was based upon numbers. They said, we're only going to allow X number of licenses, just like you've talked about this evening. Missouri Supreme Court said, that's fine. The city can legislate that. They have the absolute right to legislate that. Here, you're saying, we believe if you do this, that as a public policy, we do not want bars in our residential areas or right up next to our residential areas.
That's a good policy. We don't want the bars right close to our residential, but we want to have it close enough for entertainment. The one question I do have then is that, let's say, you said the liquor licenses are renewed in June, is correct?
Correct.
Okay. So let's say somebody comes in and we've got, for example, this 18th and Swift thing. Somebody comes in June 19 to renew their 3 o'clock license, and it's one of the ones that's right down in there. They would get a license until the development is complete, and then after their license runs out, once the development is complete, they're no longer to get the 3 o'clock, or how would that work? Does
That would be
question make
correct.
sense? Okay.
Is that up to us? Is that up to the?
I didn't hear that. I'm sorry, Councilman.
Well, my question was kind of related to that. So let's say we could authorize a license, and then the next year, maybe because we hear complaints or residents complain, then we could then not renew it the next year.
That's correct.
Correct. So we have the flexibility to choose one or the other, and it doesn't necessarily set a precedent.
I don't know that that's what we'd envisioned here. If the council enacts this buffer zone, then the Director of Liquor Control issues licenses. He would not issue a license to an establishment that violates that 300-foot buffer.
Correct.
Period.
Period.
After the establishment.
There is no, I think if you, I think you're opening yourself up for issues if you get to try and pick and choose. It's, if it's a 300-foot buffer, there will be no 3 a.m. closing licensed establishments in that. And the definition that we propose here is it will be from the perimeter of the licensed establishment. So it's whatever area that they have licensed on their liquor license, which can include just the building or a building and an attached beer garden, something like that. But whatever the perimeter of the licensed premise is, it is a 300-foot distance from that line to the wall of the building that houses residential units.
Do you have a diagram that shows the perimeter of those
Yes.
businesses by chance?
I have a map. I'd be happy to show it to you if you want to see it.
So to follow up on my question then too is if, let's say, for example, something starts construction in June of 19. It probably won't be that quick, but let's say June of 19. And somebody comes in to renew that license there in June of 19. Since it's not complete, they would renew that license for 1 more year, and then if they're within the 300-foot buffer zone, the next year, once it is complete, they would not renew the license.
That is correct.
Okay, I just want to make sure I understood.
And we're only talking, as I see it so far, with the 6 licenses we have, mostly Neon, Wild, and River Aces if we're talking 18th and Swift.
Exactly.
Yes.
Okay, and I'm not at all opposed to neither one of those businesses having 3 o'clock licenses to begin with.
Either.
I agree with that.
Having grown up about 5 feet from those types of places, I fully agree with that.
Chief, question.
Sir?
Helen's, are there still apartments upstairs?
No.
Okay, you bet.
That's a good question.
Yeah, that is no longer a residential property.
May I ask a question? Just for clarification. Because you and I have had this discussion, but I don't know if the city council would have the same interpretation. In a hypothetical, 3 o'clock bar is operating, residential comes in within 300 feet, they come in for a renewal, we would say they cannot get a 3 o'clock license, but would they be able to get a 1:30 license?
Yes.
Okay, just want to make sure that was understood. Thank you.
Correct. The only piece of this that we're addressing are establishments that would be closing at 3 a.m. They could remain, they could hold their tavern license as a 1:30 closing.
I think this was confusing at first, but we're starting to figure it out.
Well,
Good.
basically, there's a city being sovereign pretty much in these cases. We do what we want to do with it. Is that not correct?
Within reason, yes.
We have control, we make the decisions, and then if they want to argue about it, that's another point.
I got a question, and kind of unrelated, but what about just straight liquor stores that sell basically?
Yeah, package sales would be completely different from the by-the-drink licenses. They do not have, they cannot go past 1:30.
Okay, yeah.
So they wouldn't be affected by that either.
And do we still have a limit on the number of liquor stores that,
Yes, we do.
Have we reached out to any of these businesses that may be affected by this change to see what they do?
We have not.
I
And
can
really,
imagine,
it's
I can
diff-
imagine what they might say.
Well, part of the problem is that if I go knock on somebody's door and go, we're talking about this, well, when's it going to happen?
Yeah.
I don't know. Because the development has not occurred. We don't know when the development will be completed. There's too many unknowns at this point, and quite frankly, I don't know that they need to be the decision maker here, because I think it's in the city's best interest to try to protect new people that are moving into the city and give them an environment that is quiet, safe, and secure. I don't know
agree.
that you can accomplish that at 3 a.m.
I agree with that.
I agree.
anything else?
We have one more for you. Oh, so do we have consensus on the 300-foot buffer?
Yes.
Thank you. The last one has to do with how we administer sanctions against an establishment that may have violated some provision of the code. Mr. Harbrucker works for the city of Kansas City. They have a process over there that makes sense. And so we want to present it to the council for consideration on how we can potentially deal with a establishment that is a licensed establishment, whether it's a package sale or buy the drink establishment, and they violate the code in some way.
So from time to time, I've been out doing inspections, and I've come across violations. And one of the issues is that no matter what, I'm already mandated to have a hearing with an establishment. And they very much come in and just say, you know what, yes, we messed up. We were staying open past the 1:30 time. We'll face whatever penalty we have to face. Now, at that time, I would have to have a hearing even regardless with them agreeing to that. One of the provisions we would like to do is just get rid of the hearing required. That if we did meet with somebody, we could offer them a monetary suspension, basically, where they would have to pay a fee. Now, that is capped by city ordinances. It would not go over $500. But they would also still keep in the provision that even if they did not like that decision, they could still appeal that and go in front of the liquor board for a hearing as well.
So if they had another infraction,
Yeah.
then they would have a hearing.
So the question would be if they had one infraction and then maybe 6 months later had a repeat one, it'd still be up to their decision if they wanted to have a hearing or not. And kind of an example is this. Let's say we do a minor buy and that we send a minor in there and they sold alcohol and we say, hey guys, here's the information. Yes, we did that. We could say, okay, at this time, here's $100 fee. If you violate that, your second offense is going to be $300. Your third offense would be capped at $500. And let's say that they come to that second violation and they say, you know what, we disagree with that. They could still have that hearing with me if they chose to. But this is just not mandated that every time they have to have that hearing.
Is there any point when they become a nuisance and then something needs to be done, even though they agree each time? Is there a point when we say, hey, you're going to?
I would agree with that, and that is kind of at the renewal time as well, where we sit there and we could look at everything that has transpired in their year's license, and what was discussed that we could not renew it.
Okay, thank you.
They do this in Kansas City, and this expedites that process a lot. And it's good for not only the city, but also for the business owners. So, you slap their hand once, they might get their attention, and it just takes a lot of time to go through the hearing process. And it makes a lot more sense to, since already established procedures with the cap and whatnot, to just kind of cut down the time on that.
Yes.
And I'm sure that the people who have liquor license would be in favor of this as opposed to going through the hearing, which is just not time efficient. And the same thing happens anyway at the end of it.
one of the points that I'd like to make in this is depending on the violation, I want to use the analogy of comparing this to the Traffic Violations Bureau. You get a speeding ticket, you have the option of going to court, having due process, seeing the judge, and having the penalty assessed. Or, if you know you were speeding, you can go in and pay the fine. And you waive your due process in doing so. Not every violation is going to have this option available. We're talking, in the world of liquor control, we're talking about minor infractions such as a sale to a minor. This is the first offense. But if we have a serious situation at an establishment, it may be that John decides that this may call for more than just a monetary penalty. I may be looking at suspending this establishment's license or revoking a license. At that point in time, what we're discussing here as an option is off the table. It will go to a hearing at that point.
What do you think? What would you define as a serious violation?
My definition would be serving to minors, intoxicated patrons, violence. Those by far are your top three, that really affect the public. This is public safety. Those are things that really affect the public.
All right.
So I agree with Councilmember Pierce to a point. I don't think that a hearing should necessarily be required. I think it wastes your time, wastes their time, and I kind of like the traffic violation model. That's kind of how I was thinking about it as well. What concerns me, though, is I don't want business owners to get into a pattern of staying open till 2 o'clock, 2:30, and every time they just pay a little fine. They make $2,000 staying open that late, and they pay the $500 fine, and they're $1,500 ahead, for example. So that's the part that concerns me a little bit about easing up the hearing.
Sure. I don't disagree with that, and I'm just going to kind of provide an example here. Kansas City, when we have a failure where they serve to a minor, the first time that they come in and we meet with them, it's $50 and we give them an education. If they fail a second time, it automatically goes to $1,000. If they fail a third time, it's $3,500. So I would agree that.
I want them to feel that pain,
Yeah.
especially for those types of violations.
But I would still go back and say at this time, it's the city ordinances just caps it at $500. But there, as far as the monetary side of things.
Yeah.
But again, where Chief talked about that there would be times where it's so egregious that we would say, this is not going to be that. This is going to be the suspension. So you still have your hearing rights. You can do that if you want to. It's just not, what I'm looking for is just that it's not mandated every time.
Yeah, I agree. Well, maybe we can look at the fines at some point if need be.
With that
That's
monitor
something we can
change.
change, right, the ordinance.
And I think we're creating an alternative for violations that could potentially be addressed, and we bump somebody back onto the right path in terms of a sale to a minor, or not having all their employees working at the establishment holding current liquor cards, something like that. But what I don't want the council to think is that we're just going to streamline the process and no one is going to be held accountable at a higher level of suspension or revocation if problems continue to exist at an establishment once they've been given an opportunity to come in, pay a monetary fine, and make get themselves right again. If they continue to be a problem, I don't think there's going to be any issue that we will ramp up the process and look at suspensions or revocations.
In other words, what you're saying is that the person that's violated has the right to say, okay, I'll just pay the fine. But if if they decide, hey, you need to come in and we're going to have a hearing, I mean, we can do that. Yeah, so we don't just automatically just say, oh, come in and pay the fine and go on. No.
They're always going to be meeting with us. I mean, the way that I have it structured is that it's, the first time I want to at least kind of have an education with them where they sit down and we go over there and they're put on notice at that time, and then it will escalate.
Well, I think we're in agreement of that.
What about you mandate that they have education and they don't comply with that part of the penalty?
Right. Well, here's the thing. Every time they meet with us, it is an education with the hopes that they can do better. But there's always the warning that next time this is going to happen, this is what the penalty you will face.
Just out of curiosity, how many, and you may or may not have this information, how many establishments are found in violation in a year's time? Ballpark.
Yeah, ballpark here, since I've been doing this in April, I've only come across 2.
That's what I thought. There's not a whole lot of violations.
There's not a whole lot. I've done a few inspections. We've been trying to coordinate some minor compliance checks. We just haven't got there yet, but at this time, I've only really come across 2.
Okay, thank you.
As a person that used to have a liquor store, and we had a violation now and then, and they get your attention pretty quick.
So I'm hearing that we have consensus on adopting a administrative sanction and not requiring a hearing on every violation. Is that accurate?
Correct. And then we're going to look at our fines down the road, possibly, you said?
Right now, we're capped at $500 by ordinance and by state law.
Oh,
So,
by state law. Okay, never mind.
Yeah, Kansas City's got the ability to do things a little differently than we do.
Okay.
So, and I don't know that, if someone if someone has done something wrong and they've paid a $500 fine and they do it again, I don't know that I support another fine. I think it's probably time to take it to the next level at that
Okay,
point.
very good. Yes, sir.
And the ordinances that you're going to change here, you would have the flexibility to do that, to require a hearing?
Yes.
Okay. That's my concern. As long as you guys have the flexibility, I feel a lot more comfortable.
Okay. Anything else?
Well, just again, procedurally, with this direction, we will bring forth an ordinance or ordinances to enact these changes for your formal consideration at a later meeting.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for your time.
I do have a question, though, that's not related to this, what we're voting on, or just the law in general. Is it actually the law that you have to check an ID for, like, the mayor or me when you buy a beer?
No, you have to check no ID. You don't have to at all. It's just you cannot serve to someone under the age of 21.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so.
Just like, cigarettes at the dollar store. I'm behind this 80-year-old guy that's buying cigarettes, and he's fishing around they're making him show an ID.
Most
Some
likely,
policy
yeah.
decision on their part.
Policy,
Yeah, it's their policy,
Okay.
or
That's right.
most likely they've been caught selling.
Yeah.
And so the knee-jerk reaction is everybody gets carded at that
I've
time.
been carded at Save-A-Lot.
Thank you.
I love it.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.